Good morning. This is the Paradise Unicorn Priestess, bringing you day 317 of A Course in Miracles, the Yin translation, where we use female words. This would be November 13th if you're starting at the new year. Praying for others. We said that prayer is always for yourself, and this is so. Why then should you pray for others at all? And if you should, how should you do it? Praying for others, if rightly understood, becomes a means for lifting your projections of guilt from your sister and enabling you to recognize it is not she who is hurting you. The poisonous thought that she is your enemy, your evil counterpart, your nemesis, must be relinquished before you can be saved from guilt. For this, the means is prayer, of rising power and with ascending goals, until it reaches even up to God. The earlier forms of prayer at the bottom of the ladder will not be free from envy and malice. They call for vengeance, not for love, nor do they come from one who understands that they are calls for death made out of fear by those who cherish guilt. They call upon a vengeful God, and it is she who seems to answer them. Hell cannot be asked for another and then escaped by her who asks for it. Only those who are in hell can ask for hell. Those who have been forgiven and who accepted their forgiveness could never make a prayer like that. At these levels, then, the learning goal must be to recognize that prayer will bring an answer only in the form in which the prayer was made. This is enough. From here, it will be an easy step to the next levels. The next ascent begins with this. What I have asked for my sister is not what I would have. Thus have I made of her my enemy. It is apparent that this step cannot be reached by anyone who sees no value or advantage to herself in setting others free. This may be long delayed because it may seem to be dangerous instead of merciful. To the guilty, there seems indeed to be a real advantage in having enemies. And this imagined gain must go if enemies are to be set free. Guilt must be given up and not concealed, nor can this be done without some pain, and a glimpse of the merciful nature of this step may, for some time, be followed by a deep retreat into fear. For fear's defenses are fearful in themselves, and when they are recognized, they bring their fear with them. Yet what advantage has an illusion of escape ever brought a prisoner? Her real escape from guilt can lie only in the recognition that the guilt has gone. And how can this be recognized as long as she hides it in another and does not see it as her own? Fear of escape makes it difficult to welcome freedom, and to make a jailer of an enemy seems to be safety. How then can she be released without an insane fear for yourself? You have made of her your salvation and your escape from guilt. Your investment in this escape is heavy, and your fear of letting it go is strong. Stand still an instant now and think what you have done. Do not forget that it is you who did it, and who can therefore let it go. Hold out your hand. This enemy has come to bless you. Take her blessing and feel how your heart is lifted and your fear released. Do not hold on to it, nor onto her. She is a child of God along with you. She is no jailer, but a messenger of Christ. Be this to her, that you may see her thus. It is not easy to realize that prayers for things, for status, for human love, for external gifts of any kind are always made to set up jailers and to hide from guilt. These things are used for goals that substitute for God and therefore distort the purpose of prayer. The desire for them is the prayer. One need not ask explicitly. The goal of God is lost in the quest for lesser goals of any kind, and prayer becomes requests for enemies. The power of prayer can be quite clearly recognized even in this. No one who wants an enemy will fail to find one, but just as surely will she lose the only true goal that is given her. Think of the cost and understand it well. All other goals are at the cost of God. Today's passage about praying for others leans heavily into how in the separation we see our other selves as our enemies. How could it not be so if we maintain the separation, if we do not fully embrace the unity? There must be something left there in the gap between us that we see as frightening. And prayer is a useful method for lifting what we have placed between us and our sister. And what have we placed there? Our displaced and projected guilt, the things that we feel bad about ourselves. We have projected out there to whatever it is that is out there in order to feel more safe. But this isn't safe at all. Now we have something out there that we feel animosity towards or fear towards. And again, A Course in Miracles reminds us that even the slightest discomfort it's the same thing as these way more intense feelings, because the truth is there's no order of intensity or difficulty. If it feels bad, it's not love. And so we have made a jailer of our sister. We have made her to be the one that stands and bars the way to escape and freedom. And it reminds us we have done this so we can undo it, and we don't need to be afraid. We have convinced ourselves that it is the things out there that are the sources of our pain. When we look within, we find the source of the pain is there. What seems to be outside of us is just an illusion. And every time we remember that is a new, fresh opportunity to relinquish everything that seems to be outside of us to the Holy Spirit for healing, because what is the projector, what is the cause, is inside of us. And that is what needs to be healed. This passage describes any thought of animosity toward our other self as a poisonous thought, and that it must be relinquished before our own guilt can be relieved and healed. And then it goes on to say that the means for this is prayer. Prayer is the way we relinquish any way of thinking of the other self as an enemy, any thought of animosity. And it describes this prayer as increasing in power and in ascending goals until it reaches up to God. So it would seem that the way that we rise in levels in the ladder is by praying for our other selves, and in so doing, relinquishing any thought that is not pure love towards them. We are told that the lower levels of the ladder contain envy and malice and call for vengeance and not for love, and that these forms of prayer come simply in our desires. It doesn't have to be a formal asking in any way. The desire is the prayer. The passage goes on to say that the one having these desires has no idea of the effects that the desires actually have. They don't understand that they are damaging and that they come out of fear by a cherishing of guilt. They don't know that the desire itself entraps them, that hell cannot be asked for another and then escaped by her who asks for it, and only those who are in hell can ask for hell. It is coming from a place of suffering. It goes on to say that those who have been forgiven and accepted their forgiveness could never make a prayer like that. And we are reminded that our one task is to accept the atonement for ourselves. When we do, we receive the understanding of our own forgiveness, and we keep it by sharing it. So the first basic lesson of prayer that we are to understand is that what we send out is what we will get back. It says that is enough. When we get that, the next step is easy. We recognize that we have made of our sisters an enemy whenever we have a thought about her that we would not want for ourselves. And I would like to reference back what was said in the Manual for Teachers, that even what we think of as loving concern, when we are basically running simulations in our head of what we are afraid might happen to a loved one, that even that is an attack thought. Is that a prayer that makes an enemy of our sister when we fear for them? Because we're imagining something happening to them that we would not want happening to ourselves? So much of the teachings of the Course resolve themselves for us when we remember to use dream logic on what we think of as reality. That's where we begin to see the inner machinations that are the cause for everything that we see resounding in the illusion. It says that we may be stuck at this step for a long time. It says that for a long time we may perceive these steps as dangerous rather than merciful. What happens if we stop having that so-called loving concern for our loved ones? What happens if we stop running any simulations in our thoughts of what might go wrong? Do we believe it's dangerous to not think about those things? Because somehow we feel it does some good, that we're preparing ourselves for unpleasant things to show up in our dream? And here the passage reveals to us that to the guilty, there seems to be an advantage to having enemies, and this is what we have to let go. Having enemies, well, that's a convenient place to stash your guilt away, project it out, kick the can down the road a little ways so you don't have to deal with it right now in this present moment, or so it seems. So therefore, any animosity that we encounter out there in the dream illusion, we put it there for utilitarian reasons and then conveniently forgot why we did it. We hide so much from ourselves in order to avoid the truth. I have to pause a moment and think again of the story of Jesus. The implications of this is that the people that got angry and crucified Jesus must have created them, or else A Course in Miracles is not true. And this is why the crucifixion is described as the last useless journey, and why it is said that the very, 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 very last lesson Jesus learned was to listen to the voice of God and no other voice, and why I state that I believe that that happened after the wrestling, the spiritual, emotional, mental wrestling in the Garden of Gethsemane, where after the wrestling there was a communion. An angel from heaven came down and strengthened Jesus, and I believe that after that Jesus walked through the momentum of all the things that had been set up his whole life with the grace of heaven. But they were there because he placed them there. That's what A Course in Miracles is asking us to see for ourselves in our own lives. That if we, like Jesus, have enemies that want to crucify us, we put them there for utilitarian reasons in order to stash our own guilt somewhere else. But the Course also asks us to see that because we are one, we also placed them there. Because, as it says, we were there with Jesus every step of Jesus's life. There's no separation of time or space. That's an illusion. So again, we needed the story to be the way it was. We needed a Messiah to sacrifice and suffer and die for us in order for us to absolve our own guilt until we don't need it anymore. And then we change the story, and we don't tell that story anymore. This is why, repeatedly in the Course, the narrator, who speaks as the soul that was Jesus, repeatedly asks us to forgive them. Of course, it also reminds us that what we are doing is we are forgiving them for our own sins. This interconnected dance of projected guilt is reflected in the phrase of today's passage, "Guilt must be given up and not concealed, nor can this be done without some pain, and a glimpse of the merciful nature of this step may for some time be followed by a deep retreat into fear. For fear's defenses are fearful in themselves, and when they are recognized, they bring their fear with them." So when we relinquish our projecting, our own guilt may feel so overwhelming that there is an increase in nightmares of what we see reflected in the illusion, of things coming for us, because finally we've stopped pushing it away. This, I suppose, could be described as a sense of karma finally catching up with you, because you're no longer trying to send it away. And the truth is, we haven't forgiven it yet. We just projected it. And this is that ramping up of fear that can happen. Of course, the solution is receiving the atonement for ourselves, receiving our own innocence in God's eyes. And how can we do that unless we see that any harmful consequences that we've ever seemingly caused are healed? And that is why we are healed together. That is why this is an interconnected dynamic. So we are reminded, oh, that's why we find it so useful to think of ourselves as having enemies, because it holds this off. But then the passage reminds us, of what use to a prisoner is the illusion of escape? Of what use has that ever been? The passage uncompromisingly reminds us that the only way to escape from guilt is to recognize it truly. And how can we recognize it when we've projected it out into our sister, making her our enemy. We can't recognize it there. So when we look at the way out, it looks like this painful gauntlet, this painful obstacle course of terrifying bugaboos. Thinking of our sister as our enemy and jailer seems to protect us from having to run that gauntlet in the first place. So how do we set our sister free from this role we've assigned to her to protect ourselves from our own feeling of guilt? We possess an insane fear for our own safety. In our own plan for our salvation, we make enemies outside of us, jailers to keep us in the prison so we don't have to deal with the terror of escape. It says our investment in this is heavy and our fear of letting it go is strong. And so the passage asks us to be still a moment and think about this, to remember that we did it all. We set it all up, and therefore we have the power to let it go. The passage invites us to hold out our hand and receive that this seeming enemy has come to bless us, and to receive those blessings, and feel how in doing so our heart is lifted and our fear released. It is in offering this trust to our sister that we will see it reflected back to us. But, we say, the enemies still crucified Jesus. Yes, that's how it looks from our perspective. But that's why my faith is that what Jesus experienced was not torture, that Jesus was spared experiencing it that way because Jesus saw completely through all the layers of illusion and completely forgave them. Therefore, Jesus was not capable of suffering in that moment. He was engulfed in love, which is the only protection and the only safety. But from our perspective, we can't see that. From our perspective, it looked like he suffered and died. Spared with the same mercy that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego experienced in the fiery furnace in the Old Testament, not even having a hair of their head singed, or their garments even smelling of smoke, or Daniel in the lion's den, playing with the lions, the hungry, fierce lions, like they were kittens, and no harm came to him. Or as Isaac, who had been laid on the altar of sacrifice, was spared by the angel that came down and stopped it from happening. The only difference is, from where we stand now, we're not able to see that Jesus too experienced this same tender mercy. We see the illusion of the crucifixion, and that is why Jesus asks us to forgive. Seeing Jesus' travail, the people said to him, "Physician, heal thyself." Well, he did, because he asked for grace from heaven, and the grace was given. It's just that the onlookers were not able to see that that's what happened. There's a very pertinent parable told by Jesus where there was a man who was in debt and came to the one that he had the debt to and begged for forgiveness. And he was forgiven. And then this same man went forth to someone who had a debt to him and was very cruel about it, very demanding. He was awful to that other person. Well, when the powerful man who that man had a debt to found out, guess what happened? Yeah, he got in big trouble. So that story is a reminder to us that even as we are forgiven, we must forgive others in order to retain that state of forgiveness. But also, every time we ask for forgiveness from heaven, it will be given us. And A Course in Miracles remind us that the reason is there was nothing to be forgiven. What we will be given is a vision of the truth. But the way we keep it is by extending that same truth to all. And then the last lesson in today's passage is that whenever we pray for things in the illusion, and it gives examples of status, human love, or material things of any kind, whenever we ask for that, and we are reminded that just desiring it is the asking, in doing so we set up jailers to hide from guilt. These things are used for goals that substitute for love and distort the purpose of prayer. And the desire is the prayer. We don't have to ask explicitly, and that's when we lose the goal of love, and the prayer becomes a request for enemies and for hiding from love. It says no one who wants to find an enemy will fail to find one. The reason it says no one who seeks for an enemy will fail to find one is to show us the power of prayer. When we realize that asking for stuff or things to happen in the dream illusion is to create enemies, then we see the power of our prayer is answered in the finding of enemies. Kind of an unpleasant lesson, but it's trying to teach us how that which we desire is answered by showing us the true cause and effect. And it reminds us to think of the cost, understand it well, that it's not worth it. Love is the only treasure. After reviewing what is the last judgment, found in show notes, we go on to lesson 317. I follow in the way appointed me. I have a special place to fill, a role for me alone. Salvation waits until I take this part as what I choose to do. Until I make this choice, I am the slave of time and human destiny. But when I willingly and gladly go the way my mother's plan appointed me to go, then will I recognize salvation is already here, already given all my sisters, and already mine as well. Mother, your way is what I choose today. Where it would lead me, do I choose to go. What it would have me do, I choose to do. Your way is certain, and the end secure. The memory of you awaits me there, and all my sorrows end in your embrace, which you have promised to your child, who thought mistakenly that she had wandered from the sure protection of your loving arms. That is our lesson for the day. Happy practicing.